We're all about worthy causes, and so today's shout-out is for Body Positive Incorporated, a group founded by and run for people with HIV and AIDS. They provide an invaluable range of services and support for all people living with HIV and AIDS in New Zealand, including free rapid testing, a sexual health clinic, a drop-in centre, peer support networks, plus loads more. Check them out at bodypositive.org.nz. They are Mark's shout-out of choice today.
Sex, the final frontier. These are the voyages of the speculative interdimensional vehicle, Sex in Space. Its mission, to explore new points of view, to seek out fresh opinions, to boldly go where so many have gone before, and still somehow manage to totally miss the point. Subscribe to Sex in Space, wherever quality podcasts are found.
Hello, I am Jess.
Hello, and I'm Tim.
And welcome to Sex in Space. So this is our mega project that explores sex across all of its infinite dimensions.
Yes, all of them. It's also designed to turn the awkward into the straightforward and have heaps of fun while we're at it. Today we'll be playing an interview for you that Jess and I had with Mark Fisher, who is an international and now local leader in the HIV sector. He heads Body Positive, which is an organisation committed to advancing the care and quality of life for people living with HIV in Aotearoa. He's also worked closely with Women Positive and the NZ AIDS Foundation to set up the world's first ever, this is insanely amazing, HIV-positive Sperm Bank, which he'll talk heaps more about with us today. And some of the ongoing stigma that still surrounds the HIV-positive community. It was a cracker. He's super informative. He's like a fountain of knowledge and amazingly experienced and super nice. So, yeah, enjoy this one.
And now, the interview.
Hey, Mark.
Hey.
Hello.
What's up? How are you doing?
I'm good, thanks for having me.
Yeah, it's such a
thanks
pleasure
for
to have
coming.
you here. Yeah. So the HIV positive sperm bank just always like turns my brain in little revolutions.
Yeah.
How did you come to doing what you're doing now?
With HIV or with the
Yeah,
sperm bank?
with HIV, yeah.
I've been involved in HIV since around 92. Like a really long time ago, and that back in the day, that was kind of when HIV was hitting pretty hard into the gay community, and being a gay man, I thought it was good to get involved and make a difference. So I kind of switched into that career trajectory, and then have been involved ever since then. Yeah, so at all kinds of different levels, and always trying to make change. And we still haven't won the war as such with HIV. So, but we're making lots and lots of progress, which is cool. Yeah.
Awesome.
What war?
Basically eliminating HIV from
Completely.
transmission, so we get rid of it, finding a cure so that HIV doesn't exist anymore, eliminating all the stigma that comes with living with HIV. You know, it shouldn't be the way that it is, in terms of if you pick up a disease or a virus, that you get treated the way people get treated when they're living with HIV. Yeah.
So you're so currently, I'm still trying to get a sense of like all of the different medications and options going on. So currently there's no cure for HIV. There's only treatment options which mean that you can continue to live with it. Is that right?
Yeah. So
Okay.
the treatment options nowadays is that you start immediately as soon as you get diagnosed, which is great because they used to wait. They'd make you wait until your immune system had been compromised by the virus because the medications were toxic and nasty, so you didn't want to start them until you absolutely had to. So that was in the past. And then around 2 years ago, the rules were changed so you could start immediately, and that's where you start the day of diagnosis now. You take a pill or a couple of pills a day for the rest of your life, essentially, but you live a long and healthy life because it controls the virus so that it doesn't affect your immune system, but you still have to take the medication all the time. And if you stop taking the medication, the virus will come back because it hides out in reservoirs in your lymph nodes and things like that. So while it's controlled, it's all kind of dormant and waiting for you to stop taking the meds, essentially, so it could come back and
So is
reappear.
that when I've heard the term sort of undetectable?
Yeah.
Is that sort of how it's described? Is it when you're on that medication and it's sort of just kept at bay, so to speak, but it's not? It hasn't gone, like you said.
Yeah. So essentially, what the meds do is they stop the virus from replicating. So you may, when you get infected with the HIV, it replicates fairly quickly. The medications stop it from doing that, and so then what happens is you have really low levels of virus hiding out in the lymph nodes or other kind of reservoirs, and so we can't pick it up in your blood through lab testing, and so at that point, the amount of virus in your blood is undetectable as such, and so at that point, you can't pass on HIV to sexual partners. Yeah.
Okay, and that medication is anti-retroviral medication.
Yeah.
I did my research. I learned the word anti-retroviral. I'm throwing it around. And you're saying that the side effects of that are much lower than or
They're much better now. So back in the 80s, they didn't really know how the meds worked, so they would give you really high dosages of it, so to the point where it was toxic, and that's where you'd see all the side effects that people had, like the sunken skin and all those kinds of the facial hypertrophy and stuff like that, where the fat moves around, and lots of other issues around kind of peripheral neuropathy, which is a condition where the nerves get heightened in your feet and things like that. So you get all these other conditions which are side effects of the drugs and not side effects of the disease, right, or the virus. And so it was people would weigh up their choices. Do I want the side effects, or do I want to just kind of go along and see how I can go without taking the meds? And so that's where people started doing all these other complementary therapies and things. And then in 96, it all changed. So in 96, we started to do, you'll take 3 types of drugs rather than 1. And what that would do is attack the virus at different stages of the life cycle. And that's what shut it down. Because if it could get through one gap, it would get stopped at one of the other 2 points. Okay. And so that's how they've managed to control it. And then they worked on tweaking the actual drugs so that they were better and less toxic. So there is still toxicity with them at this point, but it's a lot less than what it was before.
Okay.
Yeah.
The actual symptoms of having HIV, I mean, if people have confused the side effects of the drugs with what HIV looks like, I mean, what is it actually like in a person's body who's got HIV? What is that?
So the way HIV works is it's the human immunodeficiency virus, right? So what it does is it kills your immune system. So when you first get HIV, you might have, within a couple of weeks, you might get a flu kind of thing as your body kind of reacts to it and you get an immune response to it. And then that kind of disappears and you go along, with no other symptoms. It's when it kills your immune system that then you get all these other diseases coming along that normally you would fight off that you can't now because you have no immune system. Okay? And so that's where things like cytomegalovirus or CMV, which causes blindness, might come in, or you might get PCP pneumonia, or back in the day you would get Kaposi sarcoma, which is the cancer lesions and things like that. So all those things would come along because you have no immune system to knock them out, which most normally people could do, right? So that's where eventually you would move into the stage of having acquired immune deficiency, or AIDS, right? Okay. So you've got an immune deficiency, so you have no immune system, so you can't fight off general diseases.
And what's the tracking period? So these are very technical questions, but I'm just interested. What is the period between sort of contracting HIV and then it kind of blossoming into AIDS?
It depends on the individual. So everybody's different. So some people, like I had one friend, he was diagnosed around the same time as his partner, and they progressed very differently. So he went 10 years without having to start treatment because his immune system was really robust and the virus didn't affect it, whereas his partner had to start treatment within 3 years because his immune system dropped out. And so it's just very much individual as to what's happening with that person.
Right, okay.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
Man, that's so interesting.
Yeah.
I want to ask too whether you've ever had any experience with contracting AIDS. Is that too personal to ask? Or been in a situation of high risk, or?
I'm gay, so I'm always in a situation of high risk.
Right.
My husband in Canada was HIV positive. And so when we got together, he told me he had to tell me something important. And so he told me it was HIV positive, and this is back in like the 2000s, so it was really early. And that wasn't a big deal to me. I thought he was going to talk about
you were already working in the sector.
Yeah, I've been involved and I'm informed and things like that, so it was no big deal. I thought he was going to tell me about the age difference.
That's of greater concern to you? That's great.
I supported him through that journey. He passed away in 2005.
Oh, I'm sorry.
So that was a fairly rough time, and just understanding all the things that you have to deal with in terms of health systems and just everything. It gets really hard just kind of explaining those kinds of things, because we get to the point where we have to go into emergency to see people there, and we would just take a bag of medication, because you're not just taking the HIV meds, you're taking all the meds for all the other things as well, right? So you basically end up with a bag. Yeah. And it's easy just to say, here are all the things that we're taking, or that he's taking. And it was funny, one time we went in and she asked what's going on, and we rattled off a list of things that were happening with him in terms of peripheral neuropathy. He was on doing renal failure. He was on all these different things were going on. And then she's like, have you forgotten something? It's like, oh yeah, HIV. Because that wasn't the presenting issue. It's in the background. Everything else is the stuff that you're actually dealing with in terms of what's going on.
And was this because he didn't have the treatment available to be able to suppress the HIV to a level that would just be in his lymph nodes? Is that...
What happens with HIV is it's a really simple virus in that when it replicates, it gets it wrong. Okay, so what it does is it's RNA, so it's a single strand of DNA, and when it comes into your system and replicates and creates a copy of itself, it gets up that replication process and makes mistakes in the virus. So, and that's called a mutation. And so what happens is, if you get a mutation that comes out, that now the drug doesn't work against it because the piece that it attacked has now disappeared because of a mutation. It's now resistant to that drug. And so that virus then becomes the predominant virus in your system because it can do whatever it wants because it's resistant to the drugs. And then you have to switch to a new set of drugs in order to have any effect on the virus.
Oh, wow.
And there's only so many classes of drugs that are available. And so adherence to medication, like take your meds every single day as prescribed. It's not like, people do antibiotics, and if you make it to the 12 days, that's great. But most people stop because they feel better, right? You can't do that with HIV meds. You have to take it every single day at the right time. Otherwise, there's a risk that the virus can mutate. And the thing is, once it mutates, you can never go back to that drug again.
Okay.
It's kind of written off. And so with him, because we were going through that 96, 2000s kind of time frame, he'd gone through a lot of the different medications, even though he was adherent. And it just got to the point we'd switched to a new regimen, and that had caused a total body rash and all these other issues. And so we'd had to stop, and it just kind of spiraled downward from there in terms of the medications that he could take.
I'm so sorry you lost him.
Yeah, that's tragic.
Yeah, so we've talked a bit about the physical impact. It sounds like we talked a lot about the physical and kind of molecular impacts of the disease, but of course the mental health stuff must be massive. Having that kind of regimen in your life is really intense. Can you speak to that at all?
For a lot of the people that we work with, so in the past, you didn't start treatment straight away. So you'd get your diagnoses, and then we'd work through that with you to come up to terms with the diagnoses. But usually a lot of people would keep that to themselves, and they kind of park it. Like, I know about it, it's there, I'm going to park it, and I'll just go in to see my doctor on occasion, get my labs and stuff, and then I just won't think about it and I won't talk about it to anybody. And then you'd get to the point where your labs would come back and say, actually, you need to start treatment now. And so that's when people would then go onto medication, and they saw the medication as being a constant daily reminder that they were living with HIV. And if they hadn't come to terms with the HIV piece of it, that constant reminder was a big burden for people. Because HIV is not something that you get diagnosed with and you go on Facebook and you tell, I've just been diagnosed, I'm starting treatment tomorrow. You don't tell anybody. You don't tell your friends, you don't tell your family. A lot of people don't tell their GP because they only tell their infectious disease doctor.
Wow.
So there's lots of secrecy to it.
Yeah.
So now that we've moved to a space where you start treatment immediately, It's around taking control. So we're trying to change the conversation rather than it being something that we do hide and you don't tell anybody about because you need to be ashamed of it as such, which was kind of the model that was happening before. Now it's good that we know we can take control. We'll shut the virus down so it can't do any damage to your system, and you're going to live a long and healthy life, and you're not infectious, and it's not going to change anything for you. Is the way that so it's more an empowering process of knowing your status, because people would be afraid to get tested. Everyone's so, when they come in to get tested with us, they're all really, really nervous. So many people that, it's an overwhelming kind of experience to just wait for that result to come out. So a lot of people just avoid it. Wow. And that's why we still get people that come in today that are getting diagnosed with full-blown AIDS because they haven't been tested. And they've been living with HIV for a really long time, and they just haven't had the courage to go in and get a test because of the stigma around it.
Yeah. So it's 100% about support.
Yeah, and just awareness and knowledge, and just not being afraid of knowing. HIV is not a death sentence. It's fully controllable nowadays, as long as you can access treatment. And treatment's free for everybody here. They changed the rules so that regardless of residency or what your status is in New Zealand, you can access treatment for HIV.
Brilliant.
Which is like one of the only countries in the world that offers that. Yeah.
Wow.
But it's about getting to the people that need it is the hurdle.
Yeah, making people aware of, making sure that they can get tested.
Yeah.
A lot of people won't go to their local doctor because their doctor knows their family, so they don't want to ask them for a test.
Yeah.
There's a lot of kind of judgment, and people think that their doctor's going to judge them if they ask for an HIV test. It's like, what have you done that you need to get an HIV test? That's not the question. It's like being responsible. I'm just getting tested for everything.
Yeah. Is education around this, and is that the most effective way to reduce the stigma? Because it seems to me that it's in a reasonably short timeline, right, since the emergence of HIV to now, and a lot has changed, and there's been some really heavy portrayals in the media of how awful it is, and lots of people have kind of got that information and have taken on board all the fear and stigma and stuff like that, and now here we are, and it's radically changed. The landscape of like you're saying is radically changed. Is it so? When it comes to empowering people and getting the message out there, is literal education around the facts the best and most empowering way to do it for people?
I think so. I think just making people aware.
Yeah.
And because I think information is power, and
because that seems to be what's actually missing.
Yeah,
isn't it? Is in amongst the fear and the scaremongering and that kind of stuff are the actual facts.
Yeah,
of what.
And people defer back to the 80s. And so, like all the documentaries you see on TV, all refer back to that piece.
Yeah.
And which is fine because we need that history, and that's where we came from, and we value that knowledge and the trials that people went to get to where we are now.
Yeah.
But we need to focus on the now as well. So I always, for people that are diagnosed now, the journey is very, very different from someone who was diagnosed in the 80s.
Yeah.
But the other thing that we deal with is we're working with people that have been diagnosed in the 80s and are still here.
Right. Yeah.
And so their journey is very different from, so we just had a speech or a session last week, or a couple of weeks ago during World AIDS Day, where we had a girl who was diagnosed at birth. So she was born with HIV. She's now 27. She's got 2 kids, and her journey is very different from like all the other people. Everybody's journey and the way they progress through this is really different. And you always need to ask people, where are you at, and how have you got here, and what's your perspective, essentially, and how can we support you? But just being able to educate people that, the biggest fear that people have is that they can contract it. That's the fear we see all the time is, we won't let kids play with other kids if they're living with HIV. We did a survey where 42% of people said they wouldn't eat food that was prepared by somebody living with HIV. All these crazy things, which are totally impossible, but that's what people take on board, and that's the fear that they live with. And so and that's why people won't tell people that they're HIV positive, because of the reaction they'll get.
Right.
Yeah.
So the literal, so the fears that people have around food or any of these things, what are they? Are they based purely in misinformation? Because since reading just little bits, the virus doesn't even survive outside of the body. Is that that's correct?
There's never been an environmental transfer. So I bet people are afraid of that.
Right.
The one that kind of blew me away was with tattooing. We're always concerned about tattoos and getting HIV. I was looking at data from the US, and there's never been a transmission in the US from tattoos.
Right.
So because I think it's because of the way the needles work, because it doesn't go inside the needle, and that which would protect it from the air in terms of the blood.
Of course,
if you do an injection.
It's just an external...
Yeah, it's an external piece, so it's touching the air. So it's not being transmitted through that piece of it, and it won't live outside in the ink or stuff like that. So there's never been a transmission in the US. But meanwhile, HIV and tattooing is still a really big, risky piece.
Yeah.
Right? Whereas, that's not the thing you need. We have all the processes in place so that there's no risk of other things being transferred, but HIV isn't one of them.
Right.
So there's all this stuff because when in the 80s we didn't know how it worked, and so everybody went extreme in terms of the precautions.
Yeah.
And that stuff is still here today because we haven't gone back and revisited it.
Yeah.
But the information is out there, right? Like it was 11 years ago or something from looking at your website that the Swiss
statement
came out that was like, this cannot, if you're being treated for HIV, it is not transmissible.
Yeah. So that was 2008.
Why haven't we caught up?
So they did a whole lot of research before that, around 2003, and it actually came out of a fertility clinic where they first identified it back in the early 2000s, and that's where they kind of saw that sperm from people on treatment didn't have HIV in it, and that's kind of what sparked the interest. And then in 2008, that's when they came out with this statement saying that you cannot pass on HIV if you're on effective medication. And everybody got up in arms about it, saying you couldn't say that, and where was the evidence? So they did lots and lots of research to push it further, which we've done. And they came out again and said it, and it's still pushing uphill to get people to take it on. And for people living with HIV, you've been told when you get diagnosed that you're living with a virus and you won't have kids, and a lot of people think they won't have a partner again because they're infectious. And that's what you've had for 30 years. And now you're being told, well, actually, that's all wrong.
Yeah.
And you're not infectious because you're on effective treatment, and you can't pass on to your partners, and you can have kids. So it's just a big mind shift even for people living with HIV. So it's a lot for people to take on and to actually internalize and believe.
I imagine, yeah.
Is there much grief and kind of loss around being like, why haven't we got to this point earlier,
Yeah. There is, I have seen, it's like people haven't said it that way, but you can see in the way that people react to it and how long it takes them to actually take it on board. And it's just this whole sense of missed opportunities. And, like one of my girlfriends, she wanted to have a child with my husband, lesbian. She was really, really good friends with my husband before we met, and she'd always wanted to have a kid, and she thought he would be a good candidate for that. But because he was positive, they shelved it and said no. And now she's seen all the work we're doing with the Sperm Positive Bank. And she's like, is that real? And I'm like, yeah, it is.
Yeah.
And so she's really upset because that was something that she really wanted but couldn't because of the information we had at the time.
Yeah.
But it's it's a whole hindsight thing if we knew then what we do today. So it's just, but the problem today is that even now that message still isn't getting out there really strongly. A lot of people haven't taken on that board, that message that you cannot pass it on. And we're still dealing with, eating food and weird things.
So what are the ways, just to be crystal clear about it, what are the ways that HIV is transmissible?
So it is transmissible through sex.
Right, great, cool. It's just good to say it, because it's like, there's all of this other stuff flying around in the culture. It's like, you got to know exactly what we're talking about.
But the way it works is that if you're undetectable, so you've got the virus under control because you're on medication, you can't pass it on through sex because you don't have virus, right?
Sure.
Where most people have virus is if they haven't been tested, So I don't know that I have HIV. So therefore I'm not taking medication, and the virus in my system is doing whatever it wants to do. So I've actually got lots of virus floating around. So I'm highly infectious at that point. And because I don't know that I'm living with HIV, I'm not taking precautions.
Okay.
Right? And so that's where a lot of the infections come from. And the other place that infections will come from is if somebody's disengaged from care. So if I'm going to my doctor, doing my meds and all that kind of stuff, but then I have some other thing go on in my life, like addiction stuff or mental health, or I get thrown out of my house because they found out I was positive, or some other things happening, then I decide that my health actually isn't my most important thing at the moment. I need to find somewhere to live and get some food. I need to deal with that stuff now, and I'm just going to put the meds aside for now because that's just too much.
Too much to worry about.
Yeah, and then the virus will come back. So then I become infectious again. So it's more about getting people to know their status is the big thing. Get tested, know your status, and engage in care. And then transmissions stop.
Okay.
Yeah.
But of course, it's not just sex, it's also needle sharing, is that true?
So again, needle sharing, it'll be with people that they haven't proven it, but our assumption is that if you're undetectable, again, you wouldn't be infectious through needle sharing. So you can also get it through breastfeeding.
Ah, okay.
So HIV doesn't cross the placenta. So if you're having a child and the mum's positive, HIV doesn't cross. So the baby won't get HIV in the womb.
Okay.
The baby will get all the antibodies like they do from the mum. But at time of birth, there's a risk because there's lots of blood around. So there could be a risk at that point. If the mum's undetectable, then that minimizes that risk.
Can you be pregnant and on these antiretrovirals?
Yeah, they've done lots of
safe?
studies around that. There's been no risk.
Okay.
But they've shown that there's a small chance that if you breastfeed, because the virus in breast milk is different from the virus in the blood somehow. And so there is a potential risk of transmission during breastfeeding. There's been a couple of cases, about 4 cases in this one study. So it's not common, but it's enough that the mum, even though you want to breastfeed because of that whole connection and that kind of thing, you're always kind of getting eaten up by the fact that you might be putting your baby at risk. And so people, while you can, it's your choice. It's just people kind of have a hard time with it.
Okay.
Yeah, because there is some risk to it.
Okay, so even if you're on antiretrovirals and you're HIV positive and you're undetectable, if you're breastfeeding, there's a risk.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
That's really clear.
So that's the main way it's transferred here is through sex. Yeah.
And the largest demographic being affected by this? Like, I'm interested in what's the growing demographic?
In New Zealand, it's mainly gay men.
Yeah.
Globally, there's a lot of women. I think it's over 50% women.
Uh-huh.
So while you talk New Zealand, we have one type of transmission here. So in New Zealand, we haven't had a positive baby since 2007. We had lots of babies to positive mums, but no positive babies. We haven't had somebody who's been injecting drugs become positive for a really long time. We get maybe 1 or 2 a year. There was 4 last year, but last year was an aberration. But most of it comes through sex.
Okay. What's the reason for the global situation being different from New Zealand, in
Africa.
your opinion? Okay.
Yeah. So, so it depends on the country. So, like in Canada, where I'm from, there's a lot of injecting drug issues, and that's moved into different populations. And so there's been a lot of heterosexual kind of transmission there through sex. So as soon as it gets into different populations, we've never really had it in the injection drugs crowd or in that sector here because we've got really effective needle exchange programs. And they've been in place for a really long time. So it's never really gotten into that community. So the risk here, I think there was a case just recently where they showed in Western Australia where the number of heterosexual males had more new infections than the men who had sex with men because they were traveling to overseas and picking it up overseas and bringing it back because they weren't. So while the risk in New Zealand is predominantly amongst men who have sex with men, if you're traveling a lot, you're entering different spaces where there's different populations and stuff. So you may be at risk in those places. So and people just aren't aware of that.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Sure.
Yeah. So yeah.
It's really interesting. Hey, there's so much that we lack in our New Zealand sex education. You said that information is the key, like knowledge, information is power. So at what stage do you think people should be learning about this?
They should be learning about all sexual health stuff at school. Not just HIV. But all sexual health, right?
Yeah.
The thing is, everyone's afraid to talk about sex. And people just don't have those conversations. And usually it's about contraception and pregnancy and things like that, but it's not about all the other things. So, the prime example is syphilis is the big thing at the moment, or it should be the big thing that people know about. So it's been epidemic in gay men for a number of years. And now it's popping up in the heterosexual community. And with syphilis, we've had 4 stillbirths because of syphilis.
Wow.
Last year in New Zealand. We shouldn't have any. So with syphilis, it's easily treated. You just need to get tested and treated. But if you're pregnant, and it can kill your baby.
Wow.
Right? And we've had 4 babies die because of that. And that's something that everybody should know, because it's not to know about syphilis and to know that you need to get tested for it. It's passed on through skin contact. So it's really easy to pick up. It's not a bad thing. You haven't done anything dirty, you've had sex, big deal. Get tested, and take control. And people don't know that. And so it's kind of, you feel ashamed if you're asking your doctor to get a syphilis test.
Yeah, right.
Whereas it should just be part of your annual checkup. Check my cholesterol, check my diabetes, check my blood pressure, check my sexual health.
Totally. Yeah. And by skin-to-skin contact, you mean genital contact? Genital,
or it can be through oral sex stuff as well, because you could get a canker inside your mouth, which could be infectious. So even potentially deep throat kissing could do it in that case if you were infectious. A lot of people don't have symptoms though, and they're still infectious, and that's the problem with it. And so you'll be a carrier and not know it because you haven't been tested.
Right.
And that's why it's epidemic, because it's super easy to treat.
Yeah.
And so we shouldn't have any.
Yeah, right. Yeah.
Meanwhile, we've got an epidemic.
Yeah. I feel like I heard the word, but it was mainly in like erotic historical novels, or like stories of war, or colonial times, that these words kind of flew up into my school. But short of being handed around genital herpes pictures, it really just isn't addressed. They don't really talk about how easy things are to treat. Like, I think that's the lovely hope story in here, is to go, it's so easy to treat. It's not a big deal,
Yeah.
It still feels like one.
Yeah.
You always have that story about where you're like, is it possible? I'm talking to Tim now. Is it possible to, if you've got like a gum infection and you give someone oral sex, is it possible to contract HIV? Yes, if they're not on antiretrovirals. Is that true?
Is that true?
This is one of the things that you've been...
I think I read it in some... I don't know where I read that.
I think it's important because you've said it a couple of times to me, and I'm like, is that a myth?
I can't remember.
We've got Mark here. Let's ask Mark.
Yeah.
Like a sore, I would say no. Because so the virus has to get into your blood system.
Yeah, right.
Right? So it's actually quite tricky. And so oral sex is a really low, like there is no chance of getting HIV through oral sex, is what we tell people. If you've had a tooth removed and you've got like this open wound with blood and stuff all over it, maybe don't do oral sex.
Yeah. It could be quite painful as well.
Yes, and it's probably not pretty either.
Wow, okay. So there it goes. That's your myth busted, Tim.
And happily so, yeah. I can't remember where I read that. But,
we get lots of people that come in to get tested because they've had oral sex.
Right.
And they're freaked out, and they get to the point where they're like, I've had a cold or something, so I think I've got HIV. They get to the point where they won't touch their children because they're afraid they're going to pass it on to them, and they've been afraid to get a test. And I had one guy who was 5 years. He'd been basically racking himself with anxiety because he thought he'd picked it up and had been afraid to get tested because he didn't want to know the result, which was negative because you can't get it through oral sex.
Is there support around people who do get diagnosed? What kind of support is available if you end up with a positive or a negative diagnosis? I mean, is there any mental health support?
So we link people into counselling, and I have peer support, so I have people living with HIV that provide support as well, because just talking to somebody else that's been through it is really powerful for people. And we connect you into care immediately. And then what I do is, if you're diagnosed with us, we'll follow up within 2 weeks to see how you're going and answer all your questions and all those kinds of things.
Okay.
Yeah.
And do they ever let you anywhere near schools, Mark?
No.
Why is that?
Well, all the schools are different, so it's really hard to get in across the board. So, yeah, we don't get into schools. We don't get into a lot of places because we talk about sex.
Yeah.
And we're pretty open about it.
Yeah, that's so scary, isn't it? Sex is so scary to a lot of humans, as it turns out.
It's better to get your sex education from Pornhub.
Yeah.
Yeah. Is there a risk in that? Because I don't know a lot about gay male porn. What is being represented in gay male porn?
It's the same as normal or straight porn is.
Right, so not a condom in sight anyway.
No, there's condoms there. It's just the whole portrayal of intimacy and relationships and connection and all that kind of stuff disappears out the window.
Yeah, okay.
Because it's more the wham bam kind of thing.
Yeah.
And so it's not that whole consensual kind of negotiation, and the way you want a healthy sexual relation to look like doesn't come from porn.
Right.
So the good thing about gay porn is at least you get to see gay porn, gay sex as such, which isn't represented anywhere else.
Yeah.
So it's actually good to see that there are people like you. You're not the only one, and so you can find your niche essentially. But it may not be the best way of learning about sex ed.
Yeah.
Because I know lesbian porn is quite deeply inaccurate, or just like really made for straight.
It's a category for
straight gays, whether that be female or male, or everything in between. But yeah, so for you, it's still like an empowering space to look at gay male porn. And so there was a time. Because of the HIV thing that happened, there was a time where because a lot of the porn is filmed in California, and so they were insistent that they wore condoms to be able to film there. And then when PrEP came around, so people stopped using condoms, and they were going to force them out of places like LA in terms of being able to do their filming there because they weren't using condoms. Right.
Oh, so that was like
they were really strict.
A law. Or
yeah. Yeah. Back in the 80s, it got really hard. A lot of the sex on site venues got shut down because we didn't know how things were being transmitted, and the only way to stop an epidemic was to basically stop people having sex, right? And so they got really strict on all those kinds of things. And now we're in a space where we have people that are undetectable, and we have PrEP, which is pre-exposure prophylaxis, which is where you take a medication to prevent you getting HIV. So it's like the contraceptive pill, but for HIV. So there's other tools you can use now. So I don't need to use a condom if I'm on PrEP. Yeah. Or
so PrEP is for the HIV negative community.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. So if you're not really good with using condoms, you maybe go out and party a little bit and maybe not use a condom consistently all the time. If you take a pill every day, then you're protected. So it gives you an option.
Oh, that's amazing.
Yeah.
Is it expensive?
It's free in New Zealand.
Oh, that's great.
But there are certain qualifying factors, is that right?
Yeah, there's criteria you have to meet, which is unfortunate. We're trying to get those removed because a lot of people won't tell their GP or their sexual history or their drug use history in order to be eligible for a pill when they don't even tell their doctor that they're having sex with guys.
Right, I see.
So they won't ask.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And is PrEP something that works on everybody?
Yeah.
So across the board, all sexes and stuff?
All humans?
Yeah, all humans.
Yeah, it's just an HIV med. So it's been around since 2004 as a treatment.
Okay.
Oh, wow.
And so the way it works is if you come in contact with the virus and you're on PrEP, which is basically an HIV medication, it works the same way in that it stops it from replicating.
Okay.
And so basically you get exposed to a little bit of virus, the medication stops it from replicating, and it dies off, and so you don't get infected.
So that's the pre-exposure, and there's also post-exposure, isn't there? So if you've been in a risky situation, be like, oh my God, I did forget my pill, almost like the morning after pill.
Exactly.
Okay.
Yeah, so that one you have to start within 72 hours, so you got a little bit of a grace period, and you have to go to an emergency department and tell them your whole story, and so that they'll give you the medication.
Right.
And that one you take for 30 days and then you're done. Yeah.
And so in the medical, is there still trouble with homophobia in the medical community? Like I only know from my own experience that like asking for the morning after pill is like this huge ordeal, and there are still pharmacists that will refuse, or you hear about the odd thing in rural New Zealand where people are a bit moralistic about it. Is that a problem? With
PrEP it is, because it's fairly new. It's only been around for about a year and a half now.
Yeah, which you said since 2004, so...
No, it's as a treatment since 2004.
Okay.
And then they worked out that it worked as a prevention in 2012 in the US, and so it just became available here about a year and a half ago.
Oh, wow.
Right.
Okay.
Yeah. So it's really new, and a lot of GPs don't know about it still, even though we're doing lots of education and lots of kind of promotion. And some of them aren't comfortable prescribing it because they see it as an HIV medication, and it's got all these boxes you have to tick before you can give it to anybody, and they get afraid of it, and so they're not comfortable prescribing it.
What boxes? Well, how's it different from any other medication?
There's a number of medications that you have to meet certain criteria to be eligible.
Okay.
And so this form pops up and they have to tick all these boxes. And they're like, oh, what's that? And so they get a bit afraid if they've never done it before. And then because they're not sure of how it works, they don't feel comfortable prescribing it. And there has been some reports of people that have been denied because now they're going to go out and have condomless sex with other guys. So there's a little bit of a judgment there.
But that's the whole point.
Yeah. That's the whole
point. What? So if Tim wanted to go on PrEP, what would the criteria be that he would have to meet?
Yeah.
Okay. You asked.
Yeah.
So if you've done crystal meth in the last 3 months, that would be an eligible criteria.
So any of these one criteria would make me eligible.
Yeah.
Right. Okay.
If you're an HIV negative person and you have an HIV positive partner who isn't on effective treatment, so they have a detectable viral load, you'll be eligible for PrEP.
Okay.
Right? Because that makes sense. Or if you've had condomless receptive intercourse with another man in the last 3 months and you're likely to do it again, then you will be eligible.
Oh, I can see why they get moralistic about it.
Yeah.
And that's it, right? Nobody else.
Yeah.
So if sex workers can't get it, women can't get it, unless they have a positive partner, nobody else can get it.
Wow. And so the crystal meth one feels like a little left of field. Can you explain that a bit more?
Yeah, so crystal meth, if you're doing crystal meth, it affects your ability to assess risk. And you may do things that you wouldn't normally do. And in a sexual situation, you may not use condoms reliably. So you might be a little bit more adventurous in your sexual life. So you may be at risk.
Right.
Wouldn't that be true of many things? Of
like
alcohol?
Yeah.
Yeah, so couldn't it just as well be a criteria of being like, I just got absolutely blottoed and I drink a lot and have sex. I mean, that's New Zealand's sex culture, sorry to say.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, one of my friends said alcohol's the only drug that you don't get shamed for doing.
Yeah. You get celebrated.
Yeah. Proud.
Yeah. So, but that's not included. And so one of the things for me is that we see a lot of people that come in that are getting tested all the time because they're afraid to have sex because they're afraid to get HIV. And for them, being able to take a pill which guarantees they can't get HIV is really good in terms of their mental health.
Right.
And their sexual liberation essentially is that they can go out and have sex finally and not be afraid of HIV because it's just been instilled into us. We have HIV has been here since over 30 years, so we have people that have lived their entire life with HIV being part of it. If you're gay, right? It's been taught to you since day one that you're at risk if you have sex.
And now, this.
Barbarella's. Adore me, you barely evolved pile of zagraphol excreta!
Yes, you boom.
On your lower forelimbs, vermin. Now crawl to me on all eights.
I obey, Regina.
Oh well, time's up.
But we haven't enacted the liturgy of purging yet.
We'll do it next time, Dennis. Tell you what, I'll let you wear the prosthetic pedenda.
Ooh, really?
I promise.
Now, off you go. I've got a grade 3 Andromeda carnellation to prep for, and I haven't hosed out after the last one.
Oh, okay.
While the therapists at Barbarella's continue their tireless philanthropy, at the offices of Neverdry Corporation, a disconcerting situation unfolds.
Vicratus is here to see you with him. Thanks, Karen. Send them in.
You, wish to see us?
Yes, some rather disturbing intel has reached us, Vicratus, concerning some of our less scrupulous customers substituting cheaper, inferior lubricants badged, nevertheless, as Neverdry.
Our customers have scruples.
Not as many as you'd think. However, we cannot allow anything to threaten Neverdry's reputation as the galaxy's premier pleasure vector. We need someone to visit our approved outlets, pose as an ordinary consumer, and find out who's cheapening the Neverdry experience.
Sort of a mystery John.
Pithy observation, Vicratus. I'd send Runciman from marketing, but they're self-lubricating.
Yeah, I remember the Christmas party.
Quite. Now, pick up a company Galacticard from reception, and Vicratus.
Yeah.
Don't max it out at Barbarella's.
Will Vicratus get to the bottom of the lube scandal? Will his card survive a visit to Barbarella's? Can you fart in zero gravity? Tune in next Temporal Space Unit to find out.
Barbarella's, your pleasure is our business.
And now, we return to your unscheduled program.
So gay men aren't getting this. I mean, actually, all of us need this education, but gay men aren't getting this education at school, definitely.
No.
So when you first come out, where the hell do you get this information from? How do you catch those people? Like, what are your strategies?
Well, we have our websites. We do education. We put it into the gay magazines and things like that. So we put it out there. So if you're connected to the community as an out gay person, then you'll get connected to that information, like through Rainbow Youth or stuff like that. But if you haven't come to terms with your identity and you're on the down low and you're hooking up with people through, these dating apps, but you're not gay, then you won't have connected to that information. So you may not be as informed as you could be.
So it's men who have sex with other men. It's that kind of category that need the most support around this, would you say? Or no?
Young people that haven't come out and haven't come to terms with their sexuality. So you get a lot of those. So there's still that questioning space. And so they're a little bit vulnerable in that they may not have, because you're unsure about yourself and your identity, you're not as confident in your ability to ask for what you want in a consensual manner, right? So you'll get pressured into stuff that you probably shouldn't be doing because you're not sure how you're supposed to react, And so you might get convinced to try G or some different things. You might get pressured into doing stuff that you don't necessarily feel comfortable with.
I don't know what G is.
G's a drug similar to, you use it with crystal meth as well. So G is a liquid that you can put into a drink.
Oh.
So it's can be a little bit like a date rape drug, and if you put too much in, because you can go into a bit of a coma with it.
Wow. Okay.
But if everybody else is doing it at the party, then why wouldn't you do it? So some of that naivety piece. So, and because you're not getting that education. Like, for example, we have sex on site venues here. If you've never been to a sauna before and you go in there and it's your first time, you're a little bit naive and vulnerable, right? And so it's kind of a thing where, maybe we should be running courses where we take people in to tour them around and say how this works,
Yeah.
Just as an idea.
Don't the saunas
No.
take responsibility? No, they don't.
No, they don't invite people in off the street or anything. But that's what we should do. Like, this is part of our culture. We should talk about it so people know what it is, and they should.
Sure.
And you should know how, with dating apps, how to manage those and keep yourself safe, right? Because you're in a really vulnerable space in dating apps because you're meeting with somebody who you think looks like the picture that you're seeing, and you're putting yourself out in a space where you're vulnerable. And there's been a recent case, I think it was out in New York, where guys were using it to target people
Right, I see.
Yeah, there was a guy in Toronto who was using apps, and he was killing people through it.
Oh, God.
Yeah, so there was,
I don't know what you meant by target, yeah.
Yeah, and so he was picking people up and then bringing them home and tying them up and, putting them in pot planters, essentially, at the end of it.
Yeah, I mean, we've had the Grace Milan case here all over the news.
Yeah, and so people are really vulnerable. So it's the same as when you used to go to the bar, and if you met somebody, you were supposed to tell a friend, right, that I'm going home with such and such, here's my contact number. And so people knew because you're vulnerable, right? You've disappeared, essentially. So it's just, and that's the whole dating app space, is that you need to be able to be confident in it, manage it, and set yourself up so that you're protected. It's not all nefarious, but it's just being responsible, right?
Totally.
Yeah, and nobody's taught that stuff.
Especially if you're young, eh? Now I feel kind of old and ugly enough to know what I'm doing and hold my ground.
Yeah.
Well, I think I do, but imagine being sort of 17, downloading the app on your phone, just going for it. Like, that's such a different moment in your life to do that.
Yeah, and you can meet all kinds of people. You're young, you're pretty, and you can get invited over, and they offer you all kinds of things.
And especially if there's no support for diverse sexuality at your school. You've never learned anything, but you're just like, I kind of think I'm into dudes.
Yeah.
That's a super risky space to be in.
And you can't talk to anybody about it either, probably, because you haven't. Like, when I came out, I was like 21 when I came out. And so, I hadn't done any of that stuff. And I had nobody to talk to about it either. I couldn't talk to my family because they didn't know. I couldn't talk to my friends because they didn't know. And so I was just interacting with a whole new group of people, and how do you manage that? And now the only way you're doing it is on an app. So you're not really interacting with people. You are kind of superficially, but how do you then, A, learn, and B, stay safe and be confident in that space? Yeah.
What's the answer?
Yeah. I don't know. So we started a workshop recently. It's called Sex Plus, which is where we get people to come in. I have a sex therapist that runs it for me. And it's a 6-week course, and it's just for people to learn about all these different things. So we talk about dating apps, we talk about sex on site venues, we talk about I do go and talk about HIV and all the STIs and PrEP and all these other things, and it's just, and it's an opportunity for people to ask questions and kind of work out where they feel comfortable. Right? Because there's this whole other space of kink and all this stuff that we don't talk about, that nobody talks about. And nobody's really, you don't know where to go to ask these questions. So how do you seek pleasure and learn about what's right for you, except through exploration, pretty much, is the moment. Yeah,
and it's not always safe if there's a power dynamic involved in the person you're purportedly learning with, whether or not they know you're learning.
Yeah. And one of the guys, we do an open mic night where I have people come and talk about their use of crystal meth in the sexual space, so chemsex space. And one of the guys there was talking about how he was living with his dealer, because that's usually what happens, because drugs are expensive, and so how do you manage to support your habit? And so you'll live with your dealer, you might start dealing, but in his case, he was living with his dealer, and it was a sexual relationship, and so he was feeling really pressured in that how could he get out of that situation, because he couldn't talk to anybody about it, and he didn't know anybody else that had been through that, and it got to the point where he was considering suicide as a way of escaping, because that was the only option he could see. So he managed to get out and get support and disconnect from that space. But that's why he talked at this open mic, because he said, if I can tell my story and it impacts one other person in the audience that may be in the same situation I was in, because you can see an option and you can hear other people's stories, because there's stuff we don't talk about. Nobody talks about this stuff.
Oh, absolutely. I mean, you need to know survival strategies. We all need to know survival strategies from all manner of experiences, right? In order to be able to kind of go, oh, maybe I too could do that.
Yeah. And you need to do it in a way that's, these are the options that you have in seeking pleasure. Like, it's not, these are bad things. It's just, there's all this stuff out there. Like, it is a candy store, and you can do whatever you want, and it's all consensual and safe, and it's you can do it all. There's no judgment to it. But you just need to be informed and supported in making those decisions on what you want to do and how you want to do it. You know?
100%.
Yeah.
Wow, so your work is quite wide, hey?
Yeah, we kind of touched on everything.
Yeah.
Because there's not, well, it's just stuff that's where there's a gap. So we tend to do work in that space. So to try and fill the gap. And, HIV is the piece that we work with. That's our focal point. But there's all this stuff around it that we need to have those conversations around. And are they things that impact people living with HIV now, or are they things that may cause people to pick up HIV?
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. I want to circle back to the sperm bank because I feel like we haven't touched on it.
No, not enough.
Not enough.
Yeah.
And I'm interested in, how, practically, how does it work? And I think we sort of touched on where that idea came from, that basically we need to release stigma around that. But, tell us about your beautiful sperm bank.
So, the HIV-positive Sperm Bank. It was a collaboration with us, AIDS Foundation, and Positive Women, and we were working with DDB, the marketing people. And what we were looking for is, it was the light bulb moment was when DDB kind of recognized, we were talking about how HIV works and where things are at now. And they kind of recognized with the undetectable messaging, it was kind of a message that had never been told before. So it's kind of the headline that had never been announced 10 years ago. And the big thing with undetectable is that you can have kids with no risk, right? That's the beauty of it. And that's the piece that they felt was really important to get out there so that people living with HIV knew they could have kids and there was no risk. And so the ultimate piece of that is to actually create a sperm bank. So a number of sperm banks, there's a thing where you can do sperm washing, which eliminates all viruses or everything from ejaculate. So there's only the sperm left. And that wipes out HIV as well. So that's what they've been doing since the 90s. And so that's what people thought. You had to use sperm washing, but you don't. You can just actually have sex and create a kid with no risk of transmission. Wow. And so with the sperm bank, it was about the beauty of actually being able to create life even though you're living with HIV. And so that's where we kind of ran with it. And that's why we wanted people to know, so people living with HIV to know that they could have kids, either naturally or through home insemination or through a fertility clinic or through a sperm bank. And all those options are available to you. So that's the big thing that nobody really talked about. And everyone's like, oh, but everybody knows you can do this. It's like, well, actually they don't. A lot of people living with HIV have been told, or they think that they can't have a relationship, let alone have, children. They're always told you have to use a condom every single time, you have sex because you need that physical barrier so that you don't infect the other person. Whereas that's not the reality. And you can, and for a lot of people, having a child is actually a really important value in their life.
Yeah.
And that's when we decided to go down this route and create the sperm bank. We were looking for spokespeople to be part of the marketing, and so we kind of put out a call out to lots of people living with HIV and said, would you be willing to be the front person of the campaign for the sperm bank? And lots of people wanted to be involved in the sperm bank and actually have a kid, but they did not want to be the front face.
Wow.
Because of the stigma. And that was one of our concerns when we created the marketing campaign. We thought that they would be targeted because social media is such a nasty space.
Is it ever? Yeah.
And we were going to put their face out there as a positive donor, and they were just going to get slammed by the social media, which didn't happen, amazingly. They didn't get targeted individually. It was more generally targeted towards the sperm bank in terms of the hate and the misinformation. But the amount of people that actually came forward and said, yes, actually, that's amazing and it's so empowering and I can have kids with my partner, with my wife, or I could be involved in this and actually create life, and I never thought I could. And it's just such a shift in people's mind where they can go, and they're really, really enthusiastic about it. So we've had about 25 people sign on as donors now. Nice. And we've got 15 women or couples that are looking to be recipients as well.
Brilliant.
So and they're negative, the couples or the recipients. So people have taken on the fact that being undetectable means you can't pass it on, and you can actually go down this path, and it's actually a viable option. So,
and probably learnt a whole heap in the process.
Yeah,
like kind of everyone's doing really. That's why it's so amazing. Is it sparks the seeds of doubt on all the other stuff you've been taught, and you're just like, hang on, and suddenly everybody's talking about it, and hopefully more informed, right?
I don't want to throw my mother in it, but it was funny when I brought it up with her, and she was just the fear in her voice. You know, she went, and you could hear her kind of hand over her mouth, and then was like, "What do you mean?" And there were all these layers, you know, of questions. This sort of like long conversation in which she's still left very uncertain. But you know, that's really indicative of somebody who lived through the 80s, who was born in the 50s, and was part of receiving that sort of wash of media bullshit, really.
Well, at the time, that's what we knew, right?
Yeah, right.
Yeah, but you know, that was then, and this is now, and the world's changed. So we need to, move on from those prejudices or those fears that we've built up, and look at the new science and move forward. So, and so that's the exciting part of the Sperm Bank, is it actually did create a lot of those discussions. So the campaign that we did actually went to 25 countries around the world. So France and all these other places. And it was good because they just didn't take what we'd said and take it on board. They actually had conversations around it. And what does this actually mean? And even the negative press that we got, because there was a few people that attacked us for it, and even the negative press was still saying, okay, if you're undetectable, you can't pass it on to your sexual partners. And so they accepted that and took it on board, and then they went back down to the model of, an HIV-positive sperm bank isn't a commercial viability. Why would you do something like that?
What a weird thing to attack you on.
Yeah, but it was really good because it got people to understand that, people can have kids with no risk.
Yeah.
So that was totally cool, and everybody's accepted that and moved forward with that knowledge, which is the important piece to take away from it. Whether an HIV-positive sperm bank is a great commercial idea is, that's on us.
Yeah. That's up to you and your
was it a moneymaker? I didn't realise. Is that what you were going for? Was it?
Yeah, but. And the good thing, the other reason we did it was it gets people talking about the thing that's most at risk. So rather than talking about, like we did an HIV-positive cafe last year, where all the food was prepared by people living with HIV, right?
Whereabouts did you do that?
At the Big Gay Art. So we thought we'll do it there. And so it was really visible. We did this big thing. And so it was to challenge that 42% of people who wouldn't eat food prepared by people living with HIV. It's like, we're going to do the whole cafe where it's made by people living with HIV. So really, really good. But the problem with that is it's targeting something where there is no risk. Right? So we're educating that you can eat food, and we shouldn't have to do that because there is no risk, and it's just kind of silly. Right? We're even talking about this. Now we're talking about having sex, where we say there is risk. Like that is the most common way for HIV to be transmitted in New Zealand is through sex without a condom. But if you do it when the person's undetectable, there is no risk because there's no virus.
Yeah.
And you can have kids and there's no risk. Right? So it's qualifying. You get people actually talking about the thing that's actually important to talk about.
Yeah.
Drinking from a shared glass, getting a blowjob, all that stuff isn't worth talking about because there's no risk. It's good to know, but we're actually having intercourse, sharing fluids and creating babies, and there's no risk. That's it's next level in terms of where we're going in terms of our knowledge.
Brilliant.
Yeah.
So practically people can sign up on the website?
So spermpositive.com is still online, and it's got three of our donors featured there. The three people who are willing to put up their testimonials and faces and things to the story. And we've got 25 donors registered so far and 15 recipients signed up. But people can go there, sign up. And what we're doing with that is more a matching service rather than a sperm bank.
Yes.
So technically, the Sperm Bank name is wrong. I was talking to the fertility clinics, and the reason for that is if we did a sperm bank, that's where you take a donation and put it in a freezer and then offer people number 22 when they walk in. But you get a full medical history on number 22, and it would say the person was HIV positive and undetectable. But most people would say, actually, no, I don't want that one because I don't understand it. And I don't trust the method. Whereas this way, because we're doing more a matching service where people will get a list of donors that they can choose from and say, actually, this is the person that I like. They match my criteria. And then they fully are on board with the whole undetectable and how that works.
Mm.
Right.
They'll get the full medical history. They'll know that there is no risk. And they'll get all the other stuff that you normally do when you're getting a donor match.
Yeah.
So it makes it's a much more intimate and informed and knowledgeable way of doing things, which is what we like. So that's the way we're moving forward with it.
Yeah, and just as a side note, like the donation of sperm in New Zealand is in a massive deficit. It's a 2-year wait to get, so it's not a surprise to me that people are signing up at the rates that you're talking about, because it's really hard to get people to donate sperm, and there's a lot of women and families who don't have
And in terms of the
access.
donors, like the donors have been told for their entire lives that you can't have kids, right? So now to be told that you can, that's why we're getting the influx of positive people saying, actually, this is amazing. I never thought I could do this, and I'm really, really keen to be involved. I never thought I could have, help create life.
And are there cut-offs? Because I know in a regular sort of fertility clinic or sperm bank, they kind of say, oh no, if you're over the age of, then your sperm is less
motile,
wiggly.
Yeah.
The technical term.
Yeah, we always say, I was talking to one guy and it's like, well, if it sticks to the wall, that's good. If it climbs up the wall, that's even better.
Oh, it's like spaghetti, the spaghetti test, al dente. That's amazing.
So it'll be more, depending on which way you go, because all the options are available. So you could do natural conception if the donor and the recipient agreed.
Wow.
If they agreed. They could do a home fertilization kind of model or they could use the fertility services as well. So we've spoken with the fertility clinics around Auckland, and they're happy to take people on board and help them with that process. But usually use those services if there's an issue around sperm count or other kind of things that you might need help.
Yeah.
But a lot of the time people are just using doing timing intervals to make sure that things are at their most optimum time to get things to work. So depends on which space you want to go into.
Yeah.
But all those are available to people. Yeah.
Amazing.
In terms of, I don't want to get too much into the weeds of it, but in terms of the sort of consent and legal sort of side of things, in terms of a donor being involved with the child sort of in early life or later life. I know there's some sort of funny, are there some strange laws in New Zealand around?
Not strange.
No.
There's some good laws. So,
yeah, I wasn't sure how it panned out. I'm only pretty familiar with the UK, but...
I've been learning so much about fertility clinics lately.
Yeah.
It's crazy. Not something I thought I'd need to know. But
is it essentially up to the matched people?
So in terms of New Zealand law, the sperm donor is just the sperm donor. They're not listed on the birth certificate as the father, and they're not in any way or shape the parent. But it's open to the couple and the recipient as to what involvement they have with the sperm donor, whether they're known as an uncle or whatever, or whether they get a photo at Christmas or birthdays, or whether nothing. Yeah. So the only requirement is technically the sperm donor can get to know that a baby was conceived and what the gender of the baby was. That's kind of that's the bare minimum. Yeah. That's all they would know. And on the other side, the baby, when they turn 18, can then apply to find out who the sperm donor was, so they could get a name and a contact information that way. Yeah. And there's the other thing they do is they like to limit the number of families that a sperm donor can donate to.
That's right,
So that's usually around 5 families. So you can still have multiple kids in one family, but they don't want to have, I think there's one guy in the US who's got around 300 kids through sperm donations. And I think there was a point where they tried to get everybody to come together for a family reunion kind of thing. Yeah. All these, you thought you were their lone, adopted, kid. But then you realize you've got 300 siblings. And they actually kind of look like you, and it's like kind of freaky.
Must be quite mind-blowing.
So if you have, because people are selecting their donor, if you have a very popular donor, you're going to have to cut them off at 5?
Yeah.
Wow.
Yeah. It's just because, the fear is that once the kids, because they're all around the same age kind of thing and stuff, if they actually met later in life and didn't know, there might be some kind of inbreeding kind of thing happening. Like if you had 300 kids, And that's kind of why they limit to 5.
Yeah.
Just because the population levels of New Zealand are smaller. So
Yeah, right.
Yeah.
Royal family issues.
Yeah. Yeah.
Understood.
Yeah.
Understood.
All this stuff you didn't need to think you thought you needed to know. I've been learning.
I'm fascinated. I know I need to know it.
Yeah.
You're just so abundant in knowledge, Mark. I could honestly keep talking forever. But that's such a it's so exciting to hear about how available and how possible it is to live with HIV, and just to have like all of those myths just kind of evaporate and poof fall away is quite astonishing, I have to say.
It's brilliant.
Yeah.
It's definitely been really interesting just to sort of acknowledge within yourself, hey, that you've had this misinformation, you've carried this misinformation for it's
your gum thing.
Well, that, yeah, but but I suppose if you're not in the loop, if it's not necessarily like, I mean, it should be part of everyone's learning and education.
Well, this is the thing,
because everyone actually is in the loop. But
I loved you saying about Facebook, because I was like, man, wouldn't it be wonderful if we got to a point where somebody could say, oh my God, I just got diagnosed with HIV, I'm about to start medication this week, with it, and people could go, oh, fantastic that you found out. Amazing. Wouldn't it be great if we could shift the culture to that point where you could put it out on social media and have support, open support. That's the thing, eh?
Yeah, just being able to talk about it.
Yeah.
Because people just don't. And the one thing that we, like, one of the things that drives me crazy here is that if you have HIV and you have sex with somebody without a condom and don't disclose the fact that you're living with HIV, you can go to jail.
Right.
Wow. And there's been cases of that.
There's been lots of cases.
Lots of cases.
So we're ranked 3rd in the world for the rate of criminalising people living with HIV.
Why are we 3rd in the world?
Because we do it a lot based on the population. So not the number, but in terms of the number of people living with HIV and the number of people that have been criminalised based on it, we're 3rd in the world.
And that involves, though, being charged and prosecuted as well, doesn't it?
Yep.
So there's a whole system.
Yeah. And that's even
ticking over.
And that's without transmission.
What?
So no transmission of HIV.
So it's just.
Why would you call the police?
Usually because it's an ex, and so the easiest way to get back at them is to call the police on them, and then the police get really excited about it because it's HIV, and so they'll run with it, and then
because of homophobia inside the police.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, and just the stigma around HIV is like, how could they possibly put you at risk of that, and all those kinds of things, and then you'll get. So you have to go through that whole process.
Yeah.
Now, more than likely, it'll get thrown out because of the whole undetectable messages finally kind of getting out there within the last year. But you've still gone through this whole process, right, to get to the court for that special, representative to come and give their eyewitness kind of thing to it to get it thrown out. But you've gone through shit to get to that point.
Oh, that is next level vitriol to send someone to prison. How long is the term?
Well, it's criminal nuisance or grievous bodily harm if you actually transmit, and you can actually get a number of years out of it. So the person most recently I know of got 6 months for criminal nuisance for non-transmission.
Right. So hang on, it's criminal nuisance, but it's consensual sex, obviously.
Well, it's deemed to be non-consensual because you didn't agree to have sex with somebody who's living with HIV. So they're saying that's the non-consensual part of it.
That's the non-consensual part.
But if you have,
it's not deemed to be rape.
If it's transmission, it is.
Wow. Okay.
Yeah, because it's grievous bodily harm.
Oh, I didn't realise that GBH was the criminal term for rape.
I think that's how that's where they're kind of putting it towards into that space.
Right.
Yeah, but it's the non-transmission, and also then it's. If you don't know that you're living with HIV, then it's okay, right? So you shouldn't get tested. Is kind of what it's saying. And if you're being responsible and taking your medications and looking after yourself, then that's not being recognised either. It is now. It's getting to that point, but the law hasn't changed. But it's old. It needs to just be updated. And it just shows the fear and that's come around from a long time ago, where all this stuff was kind of enacted, and how it hasn't caught up and been updated to match the science.
Right. So, sorry, just to rewind, if you're on treatment, if you're HIV positive and you're on treatment and you're undetectable, you can still be prosecuted and go to jail.
So you'll be prosecuted, based on the fact that you're HIV positive,
right?
And then you'll probably, it'll go through the process to get to the point where it's in court, and then they'll call in a infectious disease doctor as a special kind of consultant person to talk about undetectable, and then it should be thrown out. Right. That's the way it should go. But it shouldn't even get to that point.
No.
Right? You've just gone through, a year of crap.
Yeah. What a waste of time and money and stuff as well.
Yeah. So how many people are convicted a year? What does it take to be third in the world?
I don't know how many precisely, because we don't hear about all of them, but I know a lot of people that have been. So, there's a lot of space to go. So while, I paint it as a really rosy picture as to where we are now,
yes,
we're still at a point where people are kicked out of their homes because they're positive. They lose their jobs because they're positive. I have people that are in New Zealand on student visas that have come in from overseas. So you can come in on a student visa as a positive person and learn. And then when you decide to stay and apply for a work permit, you get denied because you're HIV positive.
Is it legal to do that?
Yeah, because of the economic burden of HIV, because it costs a lot in terms of medications and treatments and all these things, which is, again, is mainly historical.
Okay.
When you're accessing your health systems fairly heavily. Now it's just a one pill a day kind of thing.
Yeah.
And so they get kicked out. And a lot of these people would have picked it up here because they would have come over as an international student, not been given the education when they arrived, weren't given the education when they were at home, and weren't out at home. So they've come here, it's all party time, I can do whatever I want. I jump onto an app, I meet some people and hook up and, have a great time because I'm young and pretty and horny. And then I can't access PrEP because it's not funded for me because I'm a student. And then I pick up HIV. And then I'm sent home to my home country, now as an out HIV positive person.
Wow.
And my life is going to turn to shit.
Yeah.
Wow.
And there's no responsibility for it.
Oh, so the HIV drugs are available for, HIV positive drugs are available for everybody, regardless of your residency, but PrEP is not.
It's only available to residents.
Okay.
And meanwhile, everybody's shifting away from condoms because we've got undetectable and we've got PrEP as other alternatives, but other people can't access it as easily. And if it's your prevention tool, you should be making it available to everybody.
Yes.
Right? So there's lots of. So while we're in a really good space in terms of where we've got to, the rest of the rules and procedures and policies and education haven't caught up to that space. Yeah, because it is moving really quickly.
I was going to say it's really fast moving, right? It seems like bureaucracy is always slower to change, right? But
and pretty much over the last 2 years, this has all kind of changed fairly dramatically.
Yeah,
and we're moving into a space where it's actually really hard to negotiate consent in this space as well. Because before it was a condom, right? I can see it. I can feel it, so I know it's there, right? Whereas now we have things like PrEP and undetectable. How do I negotiate that if I don't know what that is?
Yeah.
And my choice is a condom. How do I negotiate that safety? So it's very much a changing landscape. And, while at the moment we don't even talk about gay sex in schools, how are we going to talk about those nuances and complexities?
Yes. I guess I'm interested too, just as we're coming to wrap up, which I know we need to unfortunately, but this is so juicy, is I want to ask you what the HIV negative community can do, which is myself, and I am assuming you, Tim.
I'm assuming as well.
Okay, great. We should get tested. What we can do to ally, to support reducing stigma in the HIV positive community, and for anybody who's listening who's HIV negative.
Well, get tested, know your status is the first thing, because it means you're actually informed about it, understanding like what we've learned today around undetectable, what that means, as really being just knowing that it's actually, there is no risk to it, but being supportive of people. And that's why I always talk about the journey. So while if you know somebody who's living with HIV, usually their journey is really good, but for them to open up and they can tell you what they need to tell you as to where they need help or support, or where they just need to talk to somebody. And I think when I came to Auckland 5 years ago and I took over this job at this Body Positive, I would go out to parties with lots of other gay men, and I would know lots of people there that were living with HIV, but they'd never talked to each other and they didn't know, and they all felt that they were alone because they didn't disclose. And I know there was a couple that were sharing a flat together and they were both positive, but they didn't know the other was positive, and you can't disclose that status. But what happens is you get really isolated and lonely, and because you don't feel you can talk to anybody about it. Whereas if you're open about it and willing to be educated and to have conversations with people, then if they know that, they know they can reach out and they won't be judged and they won't be shamed and they won't be stigmatized, and it's all good. Right? And I think that's more just about being informed.
Yeah.
Yeah. Just, if you're aware, when people do reach out, they know that they'll receive a kind word back, essentially.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And if anyone of any orientation is at all in any doubt, what's the first thing that they should do if they think they're positive? Or
I tell people, so we get lots of people that come in because they've done something and they're afraid that they've picked up HIV, and so they're all freaked out and they need to get tested now because they did something 2 weeks ago.
Right.
I try to get people to move away from that because that just breeds fear and anxiety. And what I try to get people to do is to test regularly.
Test a regular test, which becomes a habit.
It becomes a habit.
Yeah.
So you may have done something that may have put you at risk that you may not remember because you were drunk or something. So just get tested regularly because HIV doesn't move quickly. Same as syphilis. Syphilis doesn't move quickly. It's infectious, and so it's important that you get tested regularly for it to make sure that if you have picked it up, we can treat it and get it under control. But usually not to get freaked out over
one act or something.
Or over a blowjob, because then there's usually a lot of blame and judgment as well with the person that you did it with. And that becomes really damaging for you and for the other person, especially if there is no risk, right? Because it's just judgment, right? And stigma. And you're doing it based on character evaluations rather than actual discussion. So I try to move away from doing incident-based stuff. Because it creates too much stress. And
so just put it in your calendar and go how often?
So if you're having lots of casual partners all the time, they may be coming every 3 months, which that's not everybody. I mean, lots of casual partners. But otherwise, maybe 6 months or once a year. And just do a regular kind of checkup thing. And that way you're being responsible and you'll take control. So, that's what I try to get people to do.
That makes perfect sense.
Yeah.
Fantastic. But we should wrap it up there and say thank you so much for your time. It's been such a pleasure. And we hope to have you back many more times to deep dive into many other places with you.
The evolution of the positive sperm bank.
Yes.
When we get our first conception. Or first baby.
All right, cool. Let's wrap it there.
Thanks so much.
I hope you folks enjoyed that podcast. Since recording that podcast, one of these hosts has since used the Sperm Positive Bank, I won't say which one, and has fallen pregnant with one of 2 children to be born in 2021 with an HIV positive donor. So it was life-changing to talk to Mark. And what incredible work they're doing. So if you are interested at all in the work that Mark Fisher is doing in Aotearoa, the best place to look is www.bodypositive.org.nz, and that's for all of the chemsex workshops and all of the things that they provide to the community. If you're specifically interested in that HIV positive sperm bank, then go to www.spermpositive.com.
Yes, which is exactly what you did. What an amazing little roundup to this this episode.
I did not expect when speaking to Mark that I would be pregnant with a child from an HIV positive donor, but it's been amazing, and I'm so grateful to him for that work because it changed mine and my partner's trajectory enormously. So as you know, look, we are just kicking off this podcast. and what a kickoff it's been. We've already got some amazing other interviews, and I really recommend that you check out our other podcasts around porn masculinity and anti-shame, Asians and sex, the future of sex ed, Indigenous sexuality. Yeah, we've got such a juicy range for you all. So we would also really love to hear from you, the audience, because we want to hear your love, we want to hear your criticism, we want to know what you thought about these podcasts, the topics you want covered, the people you think we should be talking to. So just send us a simple check-in to hello@sexinspace.com. We want your emails, your pictures, your voice recordings, anything else. And we are excited to feature those in upcoming episodes. You can also follow us on Facebook and Instagram at sexinspace.com. That's sexinspace, DOTCOM.
Yes, we'll get used to saying that one day. Also, what would be amazing if you enjoyed this podcast and had some spare clicks to go around, then leaving us a 5-star rating or a review on Apple Podcasts would be totally amazing. They help heaps, and we'll be shouting them out on future episodes when we get enough. So please keep them awesome. Massive thanks to all our guests, the good folks at Factory Studios, the team at String Theory for the support, to Andrew, Tanya, Brandon, David and Richard for their amazing voices. And thanks to my blossoming co-host, Jess Sollyback.
Glowing.
And thank you for you guys for making it all the way to the end. Join us next week. Bye.
Bye. And the baby says bye too.
If you found some of this material a little challenging, keep coming back, and we'll make it really challenging.